Tonight, the nightclub boss found beaten to death a week before Christmas. A shocking assault with metal chains outside a Midlands pub. And how a single phone call helped expose a global drugs operation worth billions. Hello and welcome to Crimewatch. We're back live for the next hour with a studio full of detectives, all hoping that you can help to crack their cases tonight. And they include officers from Northamptonshire investigating the brutal murder of Les Ross, a man who had opened a new nightclub in Corby just 2 weeks before he was killed.
He had achieved a dream, a point in his life where he could move forward, and he saw that that's the way he wanted to go. And suddenly it all been taken away from him.
And detectives from Sussex urgently need your help to identify this man right here in connection with the rape of a teenager on Brighton Beach. And officers working on the disappearance of 15-year-old Lee Boxell from Surrey 25 years ago have a dramatic new theory. They think a youth club in the grounds of a church may be central to finally finding out what happened to him.
If he's out there, is he cold, you know, is he sleeping rough? All different scenarios.
We know there were paedophiles in that area, and had he gone there that Saturday afternoon, he may have discovered something that led to his disappearance.
Former policeman Martin Bayfield is here with more wanted faces and CCTV.
Thank you, Kirsty. Yes, I've got people considered particularly dangerous on the board tonight. If you know where Timmy Sullivan or Steve Marcel are, call 999 straight away. And I've some very uncharitable CCTV to show you. Yes, that is actually a dog-shaped collection box that he's stealing from a train station. Barking.
And Matthew has some fantastic news on some of our previous cases.
Yes, really great results. How about this for swift justice? Just a few days after we showed you this footage of a mobile phone robbery in London, the man responsible had been named by a viewer, arrested and imprisoned. Fantastic. Plus, I have an exclusive look at a fascinating operation to uncover a gang supplying huge amounts of chemical cutting agents to street dealers to bulk out their drugs.
They weren't importing Class A drugs into the UK, but they were doubling the amount available at street level. This is at the top end of the UK drugs trade.
But first, the latest on the case of the two police officers, Fiona Bone and Nicola Hughes, who were murdered in Greater Manchester, you'll remember, back in September. After initially denying the killings, 29-year-old Dale Cregan this week dramatically changed his plea and admitted to ambushing the PCs after making a 999 call to report a bogus burglary. He opened fire as they approached the house in Hattersley in Greater Manchester, killing both officers before throwing a hand grenade at their bodies. Well, Cregan then drove to a nearby police station and handed himself in. What you may not know is that Dale Cregan has pleaded not guilty to murdering a father and son. That father and son is David and Mark Shorts. He's accused of murdering them in two separate attacks earlier in the year. The trial at Preston Crown Court continues. Now, to the murder of 39-year-old Les Ross. Les, who had just achieved his lifelong ambition of opening a nightclub, was hugely optimistic about his future. But on December 17th, he was found in his hotel room in Corby in Northamptonshire, beaten to death.
Hello, Les? Hello?
Les Ross, known to his family as David, worked hard as a doorman and taxi driver here in the town of Corby. He'd always dreamed of running his own nightclub, so he was thrilled when the chance came for him to own a share in this one. But just 2 weeks after the doors opened, the 39-year-old was found murdered.
David was one of the best brothers you could ever think of. He was the eldest of the three of us. We're always together, always playing football or always doing something, you know, either running around or just having a great time as kids.
He was one of those sort of characters, larger than life, very, very kind man, and you couldn't help but like him. Les kept himself busy. He always retained his taxi job. He drove a private hire cab and did school runs in the morning.
Bye-bye. Door work was something he liked. He enjoyed the banter on the door, he enjoyed being with people, he enjoyed meeting people, that kind of thing. And I think being part of a nightclub scene, being an owner of a nightclub was always his dream.
Les's ambition was realised when the Rubik's Club and Lounge 66 opened on the 6th of December last year.
The night was really, really busy. Les must have shaken hands with several hundred people, and everybody wishing him luck. And he was just, I think, chuffed is the word to say.
Life seemed to be going well for Les, but just over a week later, in the early hours of Saturday the 15th of December, he came home from the club to find his house had been burgled. Intruders took laptops and mobile phones and left the taps running in the upstairs bathroom.
I've just come home from work and I think I've been robbed.
What, you've been burgled?
Yeah.
Has anything been stolen?
I've not had a look yet.
He sent me several texts later that morning to say that the police had been. In many ways, it's sort of taken the edge of everything that had come before with the opening of the club.
The water had damaged the wiring in the house, so Les had to look for alternative accommodation until it was fixed. He went to stay here at the Village Inn Express on the Jam in Corby Old Village. The following night of Sunday the 16th of December was a busy one in Corby.
Francesca, everything all right, love?
The Rubik's Club was full of people celebrating the run-up to Christmas.
No, fine, thanks, love. I'll see you later. Bye.
When the bar closed, Les headed back to his hotel, taking some food with him. CCTV shows him driving his taxi back to the Jam at 8 minutes past 2. A few hours later, he was woken by a phone call.
I did a school run with Les. He was the driver and I was the passenger assistant. And we collected children from their house and took them to the school.
Yeah, just phoning to make sure.
I would ring Les to make sure he was awake.
7:40, yeah, usual time.
He said, morning. I said, see you later. Yeah, and that was it.
But he never made it to Jill's house. At 7:30 a.m, he replied as normal to a text from a friend. It was the last anyone heard from him.
What the?
He got to about 8:15, 10 minutes straight, and I thought, where is he? So I rang him. And the phone was answered, but nobody spoke.
Hello, Les? Hello? Hello?
Les had been repeatedly punched in the head, the blows causing him to lose consciousness and die. He was found a few hours later when hotel staff came to clean his room.
Hello, there's my man passed on, so there's a lot of blood everywhere. I'm just scared to touch him when he's sleeping.
We're struggling. There's no answers, there's nothing. So at the moment, we know he's you know, someone's murdered him, but that's all we know, and we can't put him to rest. And it's, you know, it's just so difficult.
Everything on the horizon looked great for him. Happiest I'd ever seen him. He had achieved a dream, a point in his life where he could move forward, and he saw that that's the way he wanted to go. And suddenly it had all been taken away from him by somebody, and you know, and we don't know who.
Whoever did this would have entered and left the building through these doors. At that time of the morning, just after 7:30 a.m, the street would have been crowded, full of people making their way to work. Someone must have seen Les's attacker.
I don't think that myself and my family and his friends or his family couldn't really get closure until we find out who's responsible. Sorry.
He's just a nice guy, trying to earn a living, trying to better himself. Someone has decided that the world is better off without him, and I can tell you it's not. It really isn't.
Just a nice guy trying to earn a living. Well, I'm joined now by DCI Martin Kinchin. Thanks for joining us. His family, as we saw there, you know, absolutely devastated by what's happened here.
Yes, Kirsty, they're naturally devastated, having lost a loved one in these circumstances. Albeit they're now arranging his funeral, they can never really, truly put him to rest until they know who's responsible for his death.
Now, tell me, Martin, do you think, we saw the burglary there in the reconstruction, do you and your team think that they're linked to eventually what happened?
We're open-minded about that at the moment. What we know is that Les would not have been in that hotel if it had not been for the burglary on the Friday night. That was what caused him to move into the hotel where he was murdered on the Monday, the 17th of December.
Now, what is very particular about this case is there is a really, really small time frame that you've managed to narrow things down to. Tell us more about that.
That's right. We know Les received and made text messages at 7:30 to 7:32 that morning, and he was due to pick up Jill Waterfield at 7:40. He was always on time, but that morning he never made that journey.
Crucial witnesses. Let's take a look at some CCTV. Let's take a look at this bloke, first of all. Tell us what we're seeing here and why it's important.
This is a man who walks down the jam at 7:26. He attempts to cross the road and then changes his mind and returns to the pavement. This would have been around the time of the offence, and we're keen to speak to this man and find out whether he saw anything.
In the same area, also a car. Tell us about that.
Around the time between 7:15 and 8 o'clock, there was a Nissan Qashqai. It's quite a distinctive car with roof bars and a panoramic-style sunroof. That vehicle passes the jam on about 4 occasions. It may be more than one vehicle, but we're keen to speak to the driver of that vehicle. OK. For now, Martin, thanks very much. As you saw there, just an appalling case. If you can help, please do call the studio now. There's the number. It's 0500 600 600, or if you prefer, you can speak anonymously to Crime Stoppers. I'll give you their number, 0800 555 111. Now, Martin has got the first of his wanted faces.
We start tonight with Jedris Dubosis, a 36-year-old Lithuanian who's known by the nickname Sabonis. He's wanted in connection with the murder of a businessman who was tortured and then killed with an electrical cable. Detectives think Dubosis could now be living in the County Armagh or Tyrone areas of Northern Ireland, but he's known to have links to Monaghan in the Republic of Ireland. Number 2 is Abdi Kadir Karsh. Detectives want to speak to the 22-year-old in connection with an incident where a woman and her boyfriend were attacked at her home with a hammer. The woman was then raped by 3 men. Karsh, who has a surgical scar on his left shoulder and a scar on his right wrist, has links to South London, Slough, Leicestershire and the Netherlands. Number 3 tonight is Timmy Sullivan. The 25-year-old is wanted for breaching the terms of his licence after being released from prison, where he was serving a sentence for his part in the murder of a 20-year-old man who was stabbed in a car park in Essex in 2005. Sullivan, who has several scars on his face and has connections across East London, is extremely dangerous, so if you see him or know where he is, call the police immediately. And finally, for now, is Steve Marcel. He uses the aliases Andre Marcel and John Oliver, and also goes by the nickname Big Man. Police want to chat to the 43-year-old about an incident during which a woman was assaulted and in relation to several offences of criminal damage. He's also being sought by the UK Border Agency. Marcel, who's originally from Grenada, has links to Cardiff, Bristol and Gloucester. He also is considered dangerous, so if you see him or know where he is, just call 999. Now, all of tonight's faces are on the website, so if you know where they are, please call 0500 600 600, or you can text 63399. Type crime, leave a space, and then your message.
Next, detectives from Sussex are extremely keen to trace this man here. This is a CCTV picture. They want to trace him in connection with the rape of a 19-year-old woman on Brighton Beach in the early hours of Friday, the 7th of September. Detective Inspector Ian Still has all of the details. This young woman, she was not from the Brighton area, is that right?
That's right, Kirsty. She was visiting with a friend whom she became separated from. She found herself on Brighton Beach, where she was subsequently raped.
An appalling thing to happen to any woman. This young woman has been very brave, and she has in fact spoken to us about what happened.
I just remember being pushed from where I was standing. I don't know how I got there, but the seafront. I just remember screaming and crying. I didn't really know what to do.
Ian, you've got some, well, you think it might be very important, CCTV images from the evening. Just tell us here what we're looking at.
What we have here is the male that we want to speak to entering a nightclub on West Street at around 10:30 p.m. on Thursday, the 6th of September last year.
Now, can you just take us through in a good sort of thorough description of this guy?
Yeah, we believe that he's in his 20s. He's of medium build. We believe that he's got short, dark hair, approximately 5 foot 7 inches tall. He was wearing a light coloured T-shirt, which had a dark motif on the front. We believe that his trainers were blue in colour. He had jeans on and a baseball cap.
Right, very good thorough description there. Finally, this young woman has also taken time to tell us about how the rape has affected her life in general.
First couple of probably a month or so, I wouldn't leave the house at all. I wouldn't walk anywhere on my own. I wouldn't go to the toilet on my own. I wouldn't do anything. I'm not like a 19-year-old anymore. I just feel like a baby again, like I rely on everyone.
Well, Ian, thanks very much to you for now. If you were in the Brighton area then, the Brighton Beach area specifically, between 1:55 and 2:20 a.m. in the early hours of Friday, the 7th of September, and you saw or you even heard anything which might help, please do get in touch. It's the usual number for the studio, that's 0500 600 600, and indeed if you have been a victim of crime, you can call the victim support line. That number is 0845 30 30 900. Over to Martin.
Time for some CCTV now, starting with an horrific attack outside the Prince of Wales pub in West Bromwich in November. A man in a dark jacket rushes up to a guy standing outside the pub and starts whipping him with a metal chain. The victim tries to defend himself, but his attacker is determined, throwing him to the ground. A second man appears to stamp on the victim as a third rushes up and kicks the now unconscious man in the head. The gang then stroll off, swinging the chain as they go. Police think all of the men had earlier been at a party inside the pub. Name these violent thugs tonight. This is King William Street in the Hillfields area of Coventry on a Friday evening in December. A woman and her 3-year-old nephew have just bought some fish and chips and are on their way home. But what happens next is truly shocking. As they cross the road, a car speeds down the wrong side of the street, ploughing into them. The black Audi estate doesn't stop and speeds away. Miraculously, both pedestrians suffered only minor injuries. The police urgently need to find the Audi, which has a partial registration of EN57, and of course, the idiot behind the wheel. A Thursday evening last April inside London Bridge train station. As a man in a Mac walks through, he accidentally knocks into someone walking the opposite way. The man he bumped into reacts angrily. He shoves the guy in the Mac hard from behind, knocking him to the floor, before calmly walking away. The force of the fall broke the victim's shoulder. Who is this pushy passenger? A happy chap in a check shirt queues to get into the L2 nightclub in Truro in Cornwall just after midnight on a Sunday last July. Around an hour later and he's on the busy dance floor, bopping away. But it's not throwing shapes he's interested in, it's throwing punches as he violently lashes out at a fellow clubber. The force of the attack broke the victim's jaw. Tell us who he is. Lots more CCTV still to come, and you can see it all again on the Crimewatch website, or call 0500 600 600 if you can help, or text 63399, type crime, leave a space, and then your message.
Let's have a quick update now. What's happening on the phones? Martin is back here. He's investigating that murder of Les Ross in Corby. And Martin, what's come in so far?
Not too much come in at the moment. We're still looking for that information about that pedestrian who's walking down the jam. Very important we identify who that person is. They're right outside the hotel at the material time. At 7:26 in the morning, and they're wearing a grey hooded top.
We're seeing that at the moment, and it is such a small window, isn't it?
That's right. We're talking between 7:32 and about 7:47, so about 15 minutes at that time in the morning.
The car, the motive, this was a time where there would have been a lot of witnesses.
We know those people in the street travelling to and from work, waiting for buses right opposite the hotel. And again, Les was an incredibly popular and well-known figure. That weekend, he would have talked to hundreds of people in that nightclub. What had he said to people? What was worrying him? What were his concerns? This would all help us with finding the motive for the attack.
All right, I'll let you get back to the calls. Martin, thanks very much. Kirsty.
Now, on the 10th of September 1988, 15-year-old Lee Boxell vanished. A massive campaign was launched to find Lee, and his parents held on to the hope that he would one day walk back in the door of their home in Cheam in Surrey. But 25 years on, and detectives have a new theory about where Lee went that day and what may have happened to him.
He loved music and he loved football, and he'd even got a little tape recorder where he'd act out part of being a news reporter.
Hello, good evening, and goodbye.
But he was a very kind boy, very shy, done his paper round, which all boys do. We love him, and we still love him if he's out there.
This is Mr. Lee Boxell telling you the news for today.
This is Sutton, just on Greater London's southern border with Surrey. It's close to where teenager Lee Boxell lived with his parents and younger sister. He was a popular 15-year-old schoolboy obsessed with football. But in September 1988, he failed to return home after spending a Saturday morning with a friend. He was last spotted here on Sutton High Street. Lee and his friends spent a couple of hours that morning, September the 10th, hanging around the town centre.
See you later, mate. See you.
They'd gone their separate ways at 1 p.m, and Lee's parents had expected him home around 5.
We thought he went to the football. 5 o'clock went, 6 o'clock, and so on. I was worried. My husband just thought, well, maybe he missed the bus train, but I was really worried. We was ringing the police and hospitals and everything, trying to find out what's happened to him.
Police in London say they're now extremely concerned for the safety of the 15-year-old schoolboy Lee Boxell.
The theory that Lee may have gone to watch a football match on his own was plausible, and police launched a campaign involving star players, calling on football fans to come forward if they'd spotted Lee. But throughout, there was confusion about which game he would have gone to, and despite the publicity, there wasn't a single positive sighting of Lee in or around any of the football grounds. But Lee had been seen at 2:20 that afternoon on Sutton High Street, which meant it was unlikely he would have made it to any of the football grounds for the 3 o'clock kick-off. Despite no further sightings, his parents tried to remain positive.
We always hoped that he would be alive and well and would come home.
Is the nightmare, and especially now it's cold. I think if he's out there, is he cold? You know, is he sleeping rough? Is he, you know, I think all different scenarios of what could happen, what he would be like now.
But detectives also had to look at the possibility that Lee had been murdered. And following new information, officers began to formulate a theory centred around this church in Cheam. Back in 1988, an annex of St Dunstan's Church was used by local youngsters as an informal youth club. Nicknamed The Shed, it was well known locally as a place to hang out. And over a decade, hundreds of kids would have passed through its doors, including Lee. The original club was burnt down a few years ago and replaced by this building. Now, officers urgently need to speak to anyone who spent time here back in 1988, so they can confirm their belief that Lee was here the day he disappeared.
Lee doesn't appear on any databases. He's never opened or accessed a bank account. He's never come to notice of police in his own name or any other name. And I believe he came to some harm that day or shortly afterwards.
Now, your investigation is looking at a paedophile connection, isn't it?
Yes, that's a significant line of inquiry. We know young people used to gather at the Shed, and we know there were paedophiles in that area committing offences at the time Lee went missing. And had he gone there that Saturday afternoon, he may have discovered something that led to his disappearance.
Lee's bedroom remains exactly as it was the day he went missing. His school uniform is still hanging on the wardrobe. But now his parents are beginning to face up to the possibility that Lee didn't simply vanish that day, but was killed.
We want somebody to come forward and put our minds at rest to what happened to him.
We can't begin to grieve until we know for sure that Lee is not alive. We hope he's still alive, but that hope is fading after 25 years.
Well, I'm joined now by DCI Nick Scola. That youth club, it would be fair to say, would it, Nick, that some of this young boy's friends might not even know that it was somewhere that he went pretty regularly?
Yes, that's right. We have to remember this was a time before social networking sites, before everybody had mobile phones. And indeed, his friends didn't appear to know that he went there. The Shed was a place where young people would go and drink and smoke if they wanted to, with no real supervision. And he would have known an entirely different group of people there. And it's that group of people I'd like to get in contact with us now. Additionally, we were given some old photographs taken in the Shed at that time. And I'd be really interested in seeing any other photos that people might have tucked away in their attics.
Now, when Matthew was talking to you there, you mentioned paedophiles. You think that that's relevant, do you?
We do, yes. We know there were paedophiles living in the area at that time and committing offences. And if Lee's disappearance is linked to something that he saw on that Saturday afternoon in 1988 in the Shed or in the surroundings of the Shed, their evidence will be vital. They may themselves have been victims, so I'd urge them to come forward.
I mean, you mentioned there 1988, you know, 25 years ago. That's a long time. Have there been significant developments recently that have really interested you?
Well, we'll always continue to explore every possibility in Lee's disappearance. But last year in September, we searched the churchyard at St Dunstan's Church in Cheam, including using ground-penetrating radar. And that continues to be an important part of our investigation. But we have many other lines of inquiry as well, and we are committed to exploring all information that comes into us.
We heard Lee's mum there just talking in the film about the shy, kind boy. Those are still her memories. Really, tonight is the night for people to come forward. Now the time is right.
That's right. Over the years, people have phoned the National Missing Persons Helpline and Crime Stoppers with anonymous information. With the passage of time, I'm really hopeful they can come forward again and give us more information. They themselves might now have children who were
the same age as Lee was when he disappeared. And I'd really encourage them to ring Crime Stoppers so we can give Christine and Peter the answers they deserve. And if there's no good news for them, and if Lee's dead, if anyone knows where his body is, I'd ask them to tell us so we can return Lee to them.
People need to do the right thing on this. Thank you very much, Nick. You saw there in that film just how long Lee's family have been agonising over what happened to their boy. Please, if you can help, I would urge you to come forward tonight. 0500 600 600 for the studio. OK, now Matthew and Martin have got the latest on some of our previous cases.
And we start with some excellent news on a case we featured 3 years ago. We showed you this chilling footage of a man on his way to murder 27-year-old dad of two, Richard Deakin, who was shot dead as he lay in bed at his home in Staffordshire in July 2010. After killing Richard, the gunman calmly walked out before being driven off in a black Vauxhall Corsa. Well, in December, 63-year-old David Harrison and 34-year-old Daryl Dickens were both convicted for their parts in the murder. Harrison, on the left, was the gunman and was sentenced to 37 years, with Dickens on the right, who was the getaway driver, receiving 30 years. Harrison was named by a Crimewatch viewer who recognised his distinctive sewn-up balaclava, which he wore to hide his missing teeth. Great work.
Next, you may remember this footage of a man stealing a mobile phone from a woman at Deptford train station in south-east London, which we showed you in our last programme. Well, another eagle-eyed Crimewatch viewer got in touch to say he recognised the man responsible, and just a few days after the show, 35-year-old Charles Onkonkwo had been arrested, charged and convicted of robbery. He was sentenced to 10 months in prison at Woolwich Crown Court. Job done.
Back in May last year, we featured an appeal to track down the thieves who raided Durham University's Oriental Museum and stole rare Chinese artefacts worth an estimated £2 million. They chiselled their way through a wall to get access to the display cabinets. Well, this week, two men were jailed for their parts in the robbery. 36-year-old Lee Wildman here on the left and 33-year-old Adrian Stanton on the right were given sentences of 9 and 8 years respectively. The judge said they had shown crass ineptitude when it was revealed they were unable to remember where they'd stashed their haul. After the arrests, a fingertip search of wasteland by officers uncovered the precious artefacts, which were later returned to the museum.
Finally, for now, the latest on this sundial, which was stolen from the Henry Moore Foundation in Hertfordshire in July last year. Well, as a direct result of a call from a scrap metal dealer who'd unknowingly bought the sculpture valued at up to £500,000 for just £46. The two men responsible for the theft were identified as 22-year-old Liam Hughes and 19-year-old Jason Parker. They've now both been sentenced, with Hughes on the right receiving 12 months in prison and Parker on the left 12 months in a young offenders institution. Another great result, and all thanks to that one vital call.
Right, still to come tonight, the search for 35-year-old Danny Hall, who went missing whilst backpacking in Thailand in 2008. Now police need to trace these witnesses who may have seen him at this bar shortly before he vanished. And Matthew has the remarkable story of how a single phone call helped expose a global drugs operation worth billions of pounds.
Mr. Blumley. Our officers very cleverly dialed 1471. No fancy kit, no fancy tricks, just pure good law enforcement, which really started the investigation.
But first it's time for some more Wanted Faces with Martin.
And we start with Defrem Isaberi, who's also known as Ajim Mema. Police want to speak to the 38-year-old in connection with the fatal shooting of a security guard in Albania in 1997. After the murder, it's believed that Isaberi travelled to the UK and may now be living in the West Midlands. He has links to Leeds and London. He's considered to be dangerous, so if you see him or know where he is, call 999 immediately. Next is Jamal Hussein Mohammed. The 24-year-old is wanted in relation to an attempted rape in London, which happened in 2007, during which a woman was threatened with a knife. Hussein Mohammed has links to northwest London and Croydon. Number 7 tonight is John Catamol. Police want to speak to the former pub landlord about a burglary which happened at his old pub, the Monkmore Hotel in Shrewsbury, in April 2010. The 54-year-old has connections to Shropshire but could be anywhere in the UK. And lastly tonight is Roy Norman Kenyon. He's 58 and disappeared 10 years ago while on licence from Ley Hill Prison in Gloucestershire, where he'd been serving a sentence for beating a woman to death with a poker. Now, this is an old photo, but police don't think his appearance has changed that much. Kenyon has links to Oldham, but could be anywhere in the UK. Please do call and text on the usual numbers if you recognise any of tonight's faces. And, of course, they're all online.
Now, a particularly unusual case. Police are hoping that British holidaymakers might hold the key to finding out what happened to a backpacker who went missing in Thailand 5 years ago. 35-year-old Danny Hall from Norwich vanished after attending a full moon party on the island of Koh Phangan on the 24th of February 2008. Well, Detective Chief Inspector Andy Guy from Norfolk Police is here. Good evening, Andy. How much have you been able to piece together the last movements of the traveller, Danny?
Well, we know Danny flew into Thailand at the end of January 2008, and from there he moved initially to Bangkok before moving south to the island of Koh Phangan. Once in Koh Phangan, he stayed at the Lam Song Apartments at Hat Yeo Beach. We also know that on the 24th of February, he attended a full moon party, an all-night beach party, and the last sighting of him was the next day, Monday the 25th of February, at the Backyard Bar.
Just give me that in a bit more detail then. I used and you used the term full moon party. Tell me more about the date and more about that sort of party.
Well, the full moon party was held overnight on the 24th of February 2008. It was attended by 20,000 people, and it's held once a month to celebrate the full moon. On this occasion, a lot of the people present would have been British tourists and backpackers who would now be back in the UK.
Danny's friends have been very concerned and indeed very vocal. They've sort of set up a campaign. They've been trying to get information to find out just what might have happened to their friend.
Danny was just, you know, the loveliest guy, adored by his friends and family, sociable, fun, intelligent, witty, you know, just the combination that makes you a person that people want to spend time with. And for him to just go missing, just one day to be there, in touch, to be present, to be, you know, actively engaged with people, and the next day just nothing, and then for 5 years for that to be the situation when nobody has any answers. He deserves to have some sort of a conclusion to this. He deserves to have information found out about what's happened to him.
And it's because, is it, Andy, because of this very sudden disappearance that you reckon that something untoward has happened to Danny?
Yeah, we're very concerned. He hasn't used his phone since the day at the Backyard Bar where he was last seen, nor his bank account, nor his passport. We know he had no travel documentation, and we also know that his personal effects were left at his bungalow. So I'm convinced he never left the island, and I'm also convinced he came to serious harm on the day after the Backyard party.
OK, well, let me show people something that you think could be crucially important to getting to the bottom of all of this. This is Danny in this photograph, right on the edge of frame. Explain more about this. Why is this photograph so vital?
Well, this was taken at Monday lunchtime, and it was the last sighting of Danny. We're particularly interested in tracing the two men here in the centre of the photograph. The taller man is very heavily tattooed and very distinctive, and they appear to be engaging Danny in conversation. I'm also very interested in tracing anybody that may recognise themselves or anybody else on the photograph. And finally, we're interested in talking to anybody that was with Danny in Thailand or the island of Koh Phangan, especially at the beach party or the after party at the Backyard Bar. OK,
for now, Andy, thanks very much. So I wonder, do you recognise anybody that is in this photograph? Were you at that full moon party in Koh Phangan in February of 2008? Maybe you met Danny on his travels around Thailand. You can call Andy and his team here now. The number 0500 600 600. And I mean, maybe there's a lot of people in this picture. Maybe you need another look at it. It is, remember, the last photograph of Danny. Here he is here. It's on our website for a closer look. Matthew.
Let's get back to the phones. Let's find out what's coming in. It feels really busy here on the floor. I know that information is actually coming in on that Brighton rape. Ian Still is the man taking those calls. And Ian, tell us what's come in.
Yes, Matthew. We've received lots of calls in respect of the Brighton rape, which is exactly what we wanted. Some of these callers have provided names. And again, we would urge anyone who knows this meal to call in and to provide a name.
And you had CCTV from the club. Just take me through that, the description, the sightings.
Well, yes, it's probably worth looking at the CCTV again. This clearly was a horrific attack. And if I just concentrate on the description first, we believe the male to be in his 20s. We believe that he's about 5'7" tall. He's medium build. He had short, dark hair. He's wearing a light-coloured T-shirt, and you can see a large, dark motif on the front. Sorry.
It is just worth underlining, because we heard from the 19-year-old just the impact this has had on her life.
This was a very, very confident 19-year-old girl, and following the attack, she didn't want to leave her house, and she hadn't worked since.
Ian, I know the phone is ringing. I'll let you get back to those calls. Thanks very much. Martin.
Time now for more CCTV, starting with some very disturbing footage from Swansea. Two young girls walk into a shop in the Penlan area of the city on a Saturday morning last July. A few moments later, a man wearing a pale shirt and grey trousers follows them in. Inside the shop, the girls choose what they want. As they walk away, the man in the pale shirt passes them. He then touches one of them indecently. A short while later, the girls are at the till. The man in the shirt lets them into the queue in front of him, and as they wait to be served, he stands behind, watching them and repeatedly rubbing his genitalia. As he steps up to the counter, he indecently assaults the second girl. She recoils away from him, and he quickly leaves, running back to his silver Ford Focus before driving off. Sickening stuff. Name him tonight. It's the early hours of a Saturday in the Selly Oak area of Birmingham last February, inside a fast food takeaway. Two men are sitting eating at one of the tables as a red-headed man wearing a pale sweatshirt walks in with his girlfriend. A few minutes later, a row erupts between the guy in the distinctive black and white top and the man with red hair. The argument escalates and eventually spills out onto the street, where the man in the black and white top suddenly lunges at the victim. The punch knocked him out and fractured his jaw in 2 places, injuries from which he is still recovering now. Who is this violent thug? It's approaching 4 a.m. on a Friday morning at Bicester train station in Oxfordshire last November. A man in dark trousers and a hoodie foolishly runs across the train tracks. When he's on the platform, he walks over to a charity box which is shaped as a guide dog. He cuts the chains which secure it and carries it off, back across the tracks the way he came, carefully popping his canine companion onto the platform before jumping up. The dog was discarded nearby with the money from inside taken. We need you to get on the dog and bone and tell us, who is this uncharitable thief? All tonight's CCTV is online, and if you recognise anyone, please call and text the numbers on the screen.
OK, some more updates now, starting with our September appeal for your help with a fatal fire in which 4 siblings died. 19-year-old Reece Smith, his 4-year-old twin sisters Holly and Ella, and their 2-year-old brother Jordan all died as a result of the blaze at their home in Freckleton in Lancashire in January last year. Well, in December, Dyson Allen, aged 19, from Lytham, was charged with their murders. He'll appear in court again later this year, and we will, of course, let you know how that case progresses.
News about a case we featured in our last programme. Pensioner Clement Butch Desmier was murdered at his home in Bradford in August last year. Well, at the weekend, 5 men were arrested in connection with Butch's death. And on Tuesday, 63-year-old Derek Newby from Ravenscliffe in Bradford appeared in court charged with his murder. The 4 other men have been released without charge.
Now, in May last year, we appealed for help following the death of 72-year-old Bertie Atchison, who died after confronting a burglar at his home in Coleraine in Northern Ireland during the early hours of April the 30th. In the last few weeks, a 39-year-old man from Antrim has been charged with manslaughter. A 23-year-old woman has also been charged in connection with his death. They're due to appear in court later in the year.
Also in last May's programme was a reconstruction of the murder of 76-year-old retired farmer Llewellyn Thomas, who was killed at his home in Chittering in Cambridgeshire in December 2011. Well, earlier this month, 25-year-old Frankie Parker from Ely and 20-year-old Gary Smith of No Fixed Abode were charged with his murder. The pair are expected to appear in court later this year, and we will bring you an update on that case when we can.
Now, here's a question for you. How do you catch a prolific gang of drug dealers who aren't actually dealing in illegal drugs? Well, that was the challenge for the Serious Organised Crime Agency, investigating a group responsible for doubling the amount of Class A drugs on Britain's streets. But in the biggest case of its kind, the targets weren't technically breaking the law, because the cutting agents they were selling to bulk out street drugs were in themselves perfectly legal. With the inside story of the clandestine operation codenamed Junko, Matthew reveals how officers caught the drug dealers who never were.
Early one July morning in 2008, and 200 officers prepare to strike at multiple addresses. Their target, a gang involved in drug dealing on an unprecedented scale.
This was groundbreaking stuff, and we'd never investigated anything like this before.
But these weren't typical drug dealers.
They thought they were untouchable. They thought they were being clever.
Police! Police!
The entire operation stemmed from a routine arrest 2 years earlier of a local drug dealer in Bournemouth.
Whoa, 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 you were coming with us.
Inside, police found a large amount of Class A drugs. It was a decent bust, but the officers had also stumbled across something far bigger.
Police discovered barrels full of chemicals which they believe were used as cutting agents. The quantities involved suggested an operation on an unprecedented scale. The problem was the chemicals themselves were perfectly legal.
Cutting agents are substances commonly used to bulk out illegal street drugs to make more profit for the dealers. At that time, police were aware of a massive increase in the availability of Class A drugs, but the purity of the cocaine and heroin they were seizing was decreasing.
Everything pointed to a sophisticated gang selling vast quantities of chemicals to high-end dealers to bulk out their drugs. SOCA, the Serious Organised Crime Agency, launched a secretive operation codenamed Junko.
Officers started by investigating the cutting agents found at the Bournemouth arrest. For operational reasons, we can't identify this senior SOCA investigator.
Lidocaine is used legitimately in dentistry. That's what you have when you have an injection to numb your gums at the dentist. And a number of other throat sprays contain benzocaine, and that, again, numbs the effect and the soreness of sore throat, etc.
Now, this is an ampule of lidocaine. It's a tiny amount. This gang, tell me what they were trying to ship into the country.
The gang was shipping in huge amounts, 36 tons of cutting agents, which is globally about 20% of the global production.
The challenge for investigators was to find out who was supplying the chemicals to dealers and to show they were breaking the law.
What we had to prove was the knowledge and intent to actually supply those cutting agents onto drug dealers, and that was going to be the basis of our case. This was groundbreaking stuff, and we'd never investigated anything like this before.
The gang supplying the dealers had been careful to cover their tracks.
But they weren't quite as clever as they thought. They'd got careless and had left a label on one of the barrels recovered at the Bournemouth arrest. It was a small mistake, but one which would prove crucial.
The information on the label allowed detectives to track the barrel back to a legitimate pharmaceutical supplier in Brighton. The owner believed he was selling the lidocaine to a businessman who owned a number of chemists in the north of England.
Hi, with the police.
Hello.
He gave them a name, Andrew Blomley. It was a huge breakthrough. But it was what happened next that was really the start of the gang's undoing.
Mr. Blomley.
While they were there was actually a telephone call from Andrew Blomley.
Yeah, 60 barrels this time, please.
Same delivery?
Yep, same place. Thank you.
Our officers very cleverly dialed 1471, and from there they identified a mobile phone, which really started the investigation. No fancy kit, no fancy tricks. It was just pure, good law enforcement.
For your cooperation. We'll be in touch.
This piece of luck gave officers their main target. Although they were convinced the name Blomley was a false identity, they now had a mobile number and a delivery address. A surveillance operation was quickly put into place. Officers were watching as the gang members received deliveries of the chemicals, stored them, and distributed them around the UK. This is actual covert footage filmed by Soccer.
We managed to follow a delivery of lidocaine, which was been supplied by the supplier in Brighton up into the Rochdale area, and really it was from that surveillance that we identified Mr. Dale.
Soccer had their main man. The head of the group was 29-year-old Jamie Dale from Rochdale. Officers believed he was the man posing as the so-called Andrew Blomley. But how could they prove it? They had two phone numbers, one for Blomley and another for Dale.
When you actually compared them together, they were actually phoning exactly the same people, but more interestingly, they never actually phoned each other. Clearly, those phones were in possession of the same person.
60 this time.
The gang, totally unaware that Soccer were onto them, started shipping in the chemicals directly from China in huge quantities. And the more they brought in, the more leads opened up for investigators to follow.
As well as watching the gang members, they also used covert surveillance to monitor the barrels as they were moved around the country and sold on to dealers.
Same van, same plates.
But the real breakthrough was this. Jamie Dale was caught on camera meeting Barry Hartley, a 60-year-old major professional drug dealer. He was the middleman and the key to proving the gang's intent to sell the chemicals to be used as cutting agents.
He's a person who's previously been convicted of a drugs importation. He was convicted in the 90s and did 10 years. He was the contact of the organised crime group to the criminal underworld. He was the man that was moving the chemicals to the right places.
Operation Junko allowed officers from Soccer to gather crucial evidence on the gang, but it also gave them access to a huge network of high-level drug dealers. That information was passed on to police forces up and down the country. Investigators described the operation as their Trojan horse.
And early on the 8th of July 2008, Soccer made its move. In a coordinated strike, hundreds of officers went to 11 different addresses to arrest the main gang members and the drug dealers they'd been supplying.
Police! Police!
Gang leader Dale was arrested in just his pants, clutching a plastic bag containing £40,000 cash. Despite not having any declared income, Dale owned a house, had a safe full of money and a watch worth £15,000. Operation Junko had got its Mr. Big. But when questioned, he didn't have much to say.
What happened when the chemicals arrived?
No comment.
Where did you store them?
No comment.
How much did you charge for them?
No comment.
Despite never having directly handled illegal drugs, in the eyes of the law, the gang were big-time dealers, and they were charged with conspiracy to supply Class A drugs.
They thought they were untouchable. They thought they were being clever.
This is at the top end of the UK drugs trade. They weren't importing Class A drugs into the UK, but they were doubling the amount available at street level.
Big deal, this, Matthew.
It is. I mean, if you were buying Class A drugs around this time, it is almost certain that heroin or cocaine would have been mixed with these cutting agents supplied by this gang. They were importing a colossal amount mixed with drugs. You're talking a street value of £3.5 billion. And of that, almost £2 billion would be clear profit for the drug dealers. I mean, staggering amounts, big players, these.
And these convictions were a game changer, really?
They were. Dale and his gang were ultimately done for supplying Class A drugs, supplying them, even though they'd never actually come into direct contact with the drugs themselves. That was really significant. They got long prison sentences. Now, equally significant has been the change of approach at ports and airports, because since Operation Junko, it's now assumed that if you're importing these chemicals in these quantities into the country, it cannot be for a legitimate use. It has to be for the illegal drugs trade, and it is automatically seized. Now, we've got some pictures of that. One of these operations, 2 tons of this stuff, impounded, put in incinerators, and ultimately burned. That old supply route, that's been shut.
Has this changed things on the street, on the front line, if you like?
Well, it has. It's been a setback for the drug dealers. They're now smuggling this stuff into the country. It ups the chances of them being caught. It reduces their profit margins. And that cheap cocaine we were talking about that flooded the streets 3 or 4 years ago, that has been dramatically reduced. So for the authorities, all of that is really substantial progress.
Matthew, thanks very much. Now, it's time for a last quick update on what's come in on the phones tonight from Martin.
Now, remember that footage we showed you of that assault in a nightclub in Truro? Well, unsurprisingly, given how clear the suspect's face was, we've had 14 calls, 10 of them naming the same person. Detectives are confident they now know who this man is. And that assault outside a pub in West Bromwich, we've had lots of calls on that, with people suggesting they know places that these suspects frequent.
Right, there we are. That's everything for now. But remember, all of tonight's reconstructions, CCTV and wanted faces are on our website. bbc.co.uk/crimewatch also features a special anniversary reappeal on the murder of student Sam Godera. He was killed 2 years ago. There's also an investigation by West Yorkshire Police into the disappearance of a Bradford businessman who vanished 6 years ago today. And I should say that you can also get all the latest news on our appeals via Twitter by following @BBC Crimewatch. The phone lines, they're going to stay open until midnight tomorrow. We're going to be back again tonight, of course, at 10:35 after the news with the very latest on all of our cases. The viewers in Northern Ireland are going to have to wait until 11:05. Bye for now.